They don't pay $30 an hour for nothing. That's what I kept telling myself as I pulled into the parking lot. The gravel crunched under my tires, and my headlights swept across a faded red sign where half the letters were either flickering or dead. It used to say Wendy's. Now it just buzzed a tired NDY. The fog was thicker than it had any right to be for early May. It clung to the pavement like it had nowhere else to go, curling around the old benches outside and crawling up the glass doors like something alive. Cold Hollow. I hadn't even heard of the town until 2 weeks ago. Now it felt like the kind of place you got stuck in if you weren't careful. I killed the engine and sat there for a minute, watching the way the fog moved. The air smelled like fryer grease and wet hay, some awful combination of kitchen exhaust and farmland rot. Across the street stood the remains of an old corn mill. The walls were blackened with age or maybe fire, and the silo beside it leaned to one side like a drunk trying to stay upright. I could see the skeleton of its roof through the fog, ribs of steel barely holding together. Something about it all made my skin crawl. Not in a haunted house way, just this quiet wrongness that hung in the air like the town was holding its breath. I took this job because I needed to. After my mom passed away last year, everything kind of came apart. The rent, the jobs, the people. I bounced around, couch to couch, town to town. Then I decided I needed a plan. Europe. 1 year, one backpack, one giant reset button on the mess my life had turned into. But plans cost money, and the universe loves irony. So here I was, chasing freedom from behind a greasy fast food counter. The job listing looked like a scam at first. Wendy's night shift, $30 an hour. Immediate hire. No experience required. Too good to be true, right? But I applied anyway. Got a call the next day. No interview, just come in Friday night and bring non-slip shoes. That was it. I stepped out of the car and zipped my hoodie up tight. The chill hit me instantly. Colder than it should have been, like the ground still hadn't thawed from winter. The wind carried this faint sound, like corn stalks rustling, even though the fields were long dead. The glass doors opened with a squeak as I pushed inside. The light hit me all at once, those buzzing, humming fluorescent tubes that make everything feel like a dentist's office. The place was empty, except for one other person sitting on the counter stool, earbuds around his neck, staring blankly at the tiled floor. He looked about my age, tall and kind of awkward, wearing a dark green jacket with a rip in the sleeve. He looked up when he noticed me. "Are you here for the shift too?" I nodded. "Yeah, you?" "My name is Jonah." He stood up and held out a hand. "Erin." I shook it. His grip was quick, like he wasn't sure whether we were supposed to be friendly or just surviving the same strange gig. Before either of us could say anything else, a door swung open behind the counter and a man stepped out. He looked like he'd been working here since the place opened and had slowly started decaying with the building. Gray stubble, eye bags, stains on his uniform that looked like they'd been part of the fabric for years. His name tag read Marty. "You two the new blood?" he asked, not bothering to wait for an answer. "Great, follow me." That was our entire orientation. Marty moved like a man who had memorized the floor plan so well he didn't need to see it anymore. He pointed at the grill, the fryer, the headset for the drive-thru. He said something about mop water and freezer protocol, but his words blurred together like static on a screen. I don't think he cared if we were listening. Then, without warning, he slapped a yellow sticky note onto the prep counter. The ink was faded in places. "These are the rules," he said. "Follow 'em. Don't ask questions. I'm clocking out." "Wait," Jonah started, but Marty was already halfway out the back. The employee door slammed shut behind him. We heard the lock click. Just like that, we were alone. I reached for the sticky note. 7 rules, all written in blocky caps, the kind of handwriting that made your stomach tighten before you even read it. Jonah leaned in beside me. Neither of us spoke, but we both knew, without saying it, that we had just signed up for something we didn't understand, and it was way too late to back out now. We read the sticky note 3 times. Jonah leaned on the counter, blinking like he couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. I stood next to him, still holding it, trying to convince myself if it was just a joke, a twisted initiation prank. But the more I stared at the smeared ink, the more I started to believe it wasn't a joke at all. The rules weren't funny, they weren't clever, They felt like warnings written by someone who had been through something. Someone who was too tired to explain but too scared not to say anything. 1. If the drive-through speaker crackles at exactly 11:11 p.m., turn it off immediately and do not answer. Wait 10 minutes before turning it back on. 2. If a customer walks in and orders corn nuggets, tell them we're out, even if they insist. 3. Do not mop anywhere near the freezer door between 2 and 3 a.m. You might slip, or something might pull you in. 4. If the fryer turns off on its own, do not reset it. Watch it closely for 3 minutes. If it doesn't turn back on by itself, unplug it and leave it alone for the rest of the night. 5. If you see anyone standing in the parking lot without shoes, do not engage. Lock the doors and turn off the lights. 6. If you hear a voice coming from the ceiling vents after 3 a.m., do not respond. Do not look up. 7. At 4:44 a.m., both of you must stand together behind the counter and recite this phrase aloud. We close our eyes, but you stay sealed. We feed the hungry, but not the old. Jonah snorted under his breath. Okay, come on. This has to be part of the training, right? I didn't answer. I just folded the note and slipped it into my apron. Even if it was a joke, I wasn't about to test it. The first hour passed like any other closing shift. 2 kids came in, giggling and kicking the chairs, ordered fries and Frosties, then left trash all over their table before disappearing back into the night. Jonah wiped down trays and grumbled about how high schoolers were basically raccoons in hoodies. I stocked the prep station. Napkins, lids, sauces. The routine kept my hands busy. For a while, it really did feel normal. Like maybe the town was just weird, not cursed. I even caught myself thinking, this isn't so bad. Then the drive-through speaker crackled. It wasn't a normal sound. Not the pop you get when someone pulls up. Not static. It was sharp, jagged, like an old cassette tape skipping over something it shouldn't have recorded. And it happened at the exact moment the clock above the register ticked to 11:11 p.m. Jonah jumped. Did you hear that? The speaker hissed again. This time it sounded like a whisper tangled in a scream. I reached for the headset without thinking and flipped the drive-through off. Jonah blinked. You think that's what it meant? That rule? I nodded. It's not worth finding out. We stood there for a moment, listening to the silence that followed. I swear I could still hear something faint behind the dead speaker. A breath, maybe. Something low and hungry. Okay, Jonah said slowly, scratching the back of his neck. 10 minutes, right? Then we can turn it back on? I nodded again. Yeah, that's what it said. We didn't talk much during the wait. I refilled the tea dispenser. Jonah cleaned a ketchup spill near the soda fountain. We moved quietly, both pretending we weren't watching the clock. At 11:21, I turned the headset back on. Nothing happened. The line stayed dead. No whispers. No static. The fryer hissed peacefully. The ice machine rattled. Everything felt like it had picked up where it left off. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had tried to come through. Like a hand had reached out and we'd slammed the window shut just in time. Okay, Jonah said finally, forcing a small laugh. One creepy rule down. Guess we're pros now. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I was still thinking about that sound, how it had sliced through the speaker like it wasn't even meant to be heard by human ears. Something had known the time. Something had been waiting for 11:11, and we had just barely stayed ahead of it. We didn't talk much after the speaker thing. Not because we were scared, exactly. We just didn't know how to talk about it. Like saying too much might open a door we had no business messing with. Jonah busied himself with the grill. I wiped down tables and tried to keep my thoughts from circling back to that garbled voice on the speaker. Every so often I'd glance at the clock. My stomach sank a little each time the numbers moved closer to midnight. I kept telling myself the rules were just some messed up scare tactic. Maybe Marty had a weird sense of humor. Maybe this was all some bizarre corporate loyalty test. But the way that static had sounded, no one made that up. It was 11:45 when the front door swung open. The man who walked in didn't set off any alarms right away. Not the obvious kind. He was tall, dressed in a raincoat that looked too heavy for the weather. No umbrella, no wet spots. He didn't track mud or leave footprints on the tile. His shoes were clean, polished like he had never walked a real sidewalk in his life. But it was his eyes that got me. Too wide, too still. Like he was looking at something just past me, but pretending it was me. The kind of stare that makes your brain squirm before you can explain why. He stepped up to the counter and didn't even glance at the menu. Just said it, plain as day. Corn nuggets. 2 words, flat, no emotion, but I felt them in my teeth. Jonah looked up from the back and raised an eyebrow. I stared at the man. The rules screamed in my head. Rule 2, if a customer walks in and orders corn nuggets, tell them we're out. Even if they insist. I opened my mouth, closed it again. My brain spun. He was real, a real customer, not a ghost, not a hallucination, just some guy with a weird order. I hesitated. We have them, I said. They're fresh. Jonah's mouth opened like he wanted to say something. But he didn't. He just watched. I turned, grabbed a small paper boat from the warmer, and used the tongs to drop in 6 hot corn nuggets. My hands shook, just a little. I didn't know why I was doing it. Maybe because he looked so normal on the surface. Maybe because I didn't want to make a scene. Or maybe because, deep down, I didn't fully believe the rules yet. The man didn't take his eyes off me the whole time. I bagged the nuggets, handed them over the counter. He smiled. That's when I saw them. His teeth. They were small, too uniform, too yellow, shiny and fat and too smooth. Corn kernels, packed tightly into a human grin. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. He turned and walked out, and just like that, the moment passed. The door swung shut behind him, but the air didn't go back to normal. It was heavier, like someone had sucked all the oxygen out and pumped in something thick and sour. My skin felt clammy. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. What the hell was that? Jonah whispered. I didn't answer. I was still staring at the door. Then the lights above the counter flickered once. Just once. But it was enough to make every hair on my arm stand straight up. I shouldn't have done that, I muttered. Jonah stayed quiet. I could feel him thinking it too. The rules weren't a joke, and we had just broken one. We didn't talk much after that. The lobby was dead quiet, and we weren't sure if we should turn the music on or leave the silence alone. Every time I passed the front counter, I found myself glancing at the door, half expecting that man to still be standing there, waiting for a refill or something worse. But he was gone. Mostly. The air felt wrong. Not freezing or smoky or anything obvious, just heavy. Like something had come in with him and stayed behind. Jonah finally broke the silence around 12:25. He tossed an empty fry box into the trash and said, "Look, maybe it's just a coincidence. Like, maybe that guy was just messed up, not supernatural, just, cold and creepy and allergic to dentists." I didn't say anything. I was watching the fryer. Not thinking. Just watching the way the oil bubbled and hissed. Something about it felt too normal now, like it was trying too hard to prove everything was fine. At 12:30, the fryer clicked off. Just click and then silence. Jonah turned. "You want me to reset it?" I shook my head. My throat had gone dry. "No, rule 4. He squinted. "Seriously? The thing just shut off. We probably tripped the breaker or something." "Don't touch it," I said, louder than I meant to. That got his attention. He backed off a step, raising both hands like I was pointing a knife at him. "Okay, chill. I was just trying to help." I looked down at the fryer. The oil had stopped moving. It was just a flat pool now, cooling, no steam rising. I glanced at the clock. 12:31. We were supposed to wait 3 minutes. 3 full minutes. Just watch it. So that's what we did. Jonah leaned against the back counter, arms folded, trying to act casual but bouncing one leg non-stop. I stood frozen, hands clenched into fists behind my back so he wouldn't see them shaking. The fryer sat there like a dead thing. Then I heard it. A faint tick-tick-tick, like something shifting inside. Not mechanical, not a timer, more like nails tapping glass. I took a half step back. Jonah looked at me. "You hear that?" "Yeah." Neither of us moved. 12:33. Still nothing. The fryer didn't so much as buzz. It just sat there, quiet and dark. The room felt colder now, like the heat from the kitchen was being sucked away. Jonah cleared his throat, like he was going to say something, but then the fryer clicked again. The oil began to bubble, slow at first, then steady. Steam curled upward like breath after a long silence. It turned itself back on. We didn't cheer, we didn't say anything, just stared at it like it might still explode or vomit out whatever had been ticking inside. After a long moment, Jonah muttered, "Okay." That was weird. Yeah. He looked at me, real serious. You think it would have done something if I'd reset it? I didn't answer. I didn't want to say what I was thinking, but I couldn't stop picturing it. Him reaching for the reset switch, and something pulling his arm down into the oil, or a face bubbling up from underneath the surface, corn teeth and all. Instead, I just said, "Let's not find out." He nodded slowly. We went back to our stations, but neither of us turned our backs on the fryer for the rest of the hour. It stayed on, but I swear it hissed louder now, like it was watching us back. By 1:30, we had mostly settled into a rhythm. I stocked cups and lids. Jonah wiped down trays. The place had this stale sort of quiet, the kind where every little sound felt too loud. The squeak of a shoe, the hum of the ice machine, the dull clack of tongues against the prep table, but nothing felt normal anymore. Ever since the fryer incident, I'd been counting every rule in my head, keeping track like it was the only thing keeping us alive. And the air hadn't gone back to normal. At 1:50 a.m., Jonah grabbed the mop from the back closet without saying anything. I was restocking straws and didn't even think to stop him until I heard the sound of water slapping the tile. It was too close. I turned just in time to see him rounding the corner near the freezer, dragging the mop straight past it. "Not by the freezer!" I shouted, dropping a sleeve of lids onto the floor. He jumped, caught mid-step. "What?" "Rule 3, I hissed, running over. "No mopping near the freezer between 2 and 3. He looked at me like I was being dramatic. "Come on, Erin, it's a freezer. What's it gonna do, shiver me to death?" I didn't answer. My eyes were locked on the freezer door. Something was wrong. The handle, usually just brushed steel, had frost creeping up from the base. Real frost. Like fingers of ice were crawling their way up the metal. And the door itself, it was pulsing. Not visibly moving, but there was this pressure, like it was breathing, like something behind it was pushing forward just enough to let you know it was there. Jonah stepped back. "Okay, that's new." I grabbed his sleeve and yanked him away, dragging the mop bucket with my foot until we were clear of the area. We stood by the fry station, staring. The mop water had left a wet trail across the floor, and where it got close to the freezer, it started to freeze. Not fully, just thin sheets of frost forming over the puddle like it was spreading upward from the tile itself. Jonah said nothing. His face had gone pale. The freezer groaned, not the kind of groan metal makes when it contracts. This was deeper. Organic, like a long exhale through a mouth full of teeth. Neither of us moved. The frost stopped at the edge of the trail and held there, like whatever was inside had changed its mind. I reached for the thermostat beside the freezer, just to make sure it wasn't some kind of malfunction, but the dial hadn't moved. The temperature was stable. "Something was behind that door," I whispered. Jonah didn't argue. That's how I knew he believed me. We didn't mop again for the rest of the night. Left the bucket by the closet, left the floor dirty. And the freezer? It stayed quiet. But every time I passed it, I could feel the cold coming off in waves. Not from inside, from something pressing out like it wanted in. After the freezer thing, we kept to our corners. Jonah stayed close to the front, obsessively wiping down the same counter over and over. I camped near the register pretending to refill sauce packets, but mostly just staring at the clock. It was crawling now. Every minute felt stretched, like the night itself was dragging, reluctant to let us go. The air was weird again, this time dry and still. At 2:45 a.m., the first hiss came from the ceiling. It was faint, just a slow exhale of air. At first I thought it was the AC kicking in, but it kept going, longer than it should, and colder. The air didn't move, it just hung. Then the voice came through. "Hello?" It was soft, familiar. "Help me." I froze. It sounded like me. Not exactly, just close enough to make my stomach twist. Like someone trying to mimic my voice but getting the pitch just a little too low, like it was echoing through a throat full of water. Jonah looked up. It happened fast, a reflex. I reached for him, but it was too late. He stumbled backward, mouth open, hand pressed against his chest like he'd been punched in the ribs. "Jonah?" I whispered. He didn't answer at first, just stood there, breathing too fast, eyes locked on the ceiling vent. I didn't mean to," he said finally, voice shaking. "It sounded like you." But I didn't make the same mistake. I kept my eyes low, focused on the floor, on the counters, anywhere but above. The voice kept going. "Please let me out, Erin. It's cold in here." That last one stopped me cold. It wasn't just mimicking anymore, it knew my name. I backed up slowly, careful not to look. "Rule 6, I said under my breath. "Do not respond. Do not look up." But I looked. Jonah whispered. I looked right at it. "What did you see?" He didn't answer. He just shook his head slowly, eyes still wide. The vent hissed again, and this time something scraped along the inside, like fingers dragging across metal. 5 distinct drags in a steady, deliberate rhythm. Jonah dropped to a crouch and covered his ears. I crouched next to him, not touching him, just trying to stay grounded. The voice stopped. Just silence. And I don't know what was worse. We stayed like that for a long time, maybe 15 minutes, maybe more. Neither of us said a word. Eventually, Jonah stood and wiped his face with his sleeve. He didn't look at the vent again. Neither did I. There were still 2 rules left. Just 2. But somehow we both knew that surviving this shift had never been about how many rules there were. It was about how many we could afford to break. The air didn't feel like air anymore. It had this weight to it. Every light seemed dimmer. Every shadow stretched just a little too far. Even the clocks felt like they were ticking underwater. We didn't speak. Jonah sat on an overturned milk crate near the fry station, staring at the floor like it might open up and swallow him. I leaned against the counter, eyes on the lobby window, waiting. The next rule was easy to remember, but impossible to prepare for. Rule 5. If you see anyone standing in the parking lot without shoes, do not engage. Lock the doors and turn off the lights. At exactly 4 a.m., the lights above us flickered, not the kind of flicker you get when a bulb's about to die. This was sharp, violent, like the wiring was being yanked from the inside. They buzzed, flared, dimmed again. That's when I saw him. A man. Standing in the middle of the lot. No shoes. He wasn't moving, wasn't swaying, just perfectly still, arms hanging limp by his sides. His skin looked wrong in the flickering light, grayish, like old paper soaked in grease. His arms were too long. His hands didn't look like hands at all, just stretched shapes with swollen fingers. His head hung at a sharp angle to the left, as if the neck couldn't hold it up anymore. "Jonah," I whispered. He looked up, saw the figure. We scrambled. I ran to the front and yanked the lock into place. Jonah hit the switch for the lights. Darkness slammed into the lobby like a closing door. We ducked below the counter and stayed there, breathing fast, trying not to make a sound. Through the narrow space between the counter and the window, I could still see him. Standing there, barefoot on the cracked concrete, unmoving. He didn't blink. I'm not sure he could. He just stared straight ahead. At us. Minutes passed. It felt like hours. My knees ached. My palms were slick with sweat. Jonah whispered, "Is he gone?" I shook my head. "Don't check." We waited. Eventually, the sky began to change. Not sunrise, not yet, but the first hints of gray on the horizon. A thin, pale light that didn't come from inside the building. Outside, the barefoot man finally shifted. He stepped backward once, slowly, then turned, head still tilted wrong, and disappeared into the fog that rolled in from the direction of the old corn mill. Neither of us moved until the last trace of him was gone. But just as I started to exhale, the whispering returned. Not from the speaker, not from the vent, from everywhere. The cracks in the tile, the spaces under the fridge, the drains, the walls, the slits under the doors. Every dark place in the building seemed to hum with sound. "We are hungry, and we are still here." Jonah grabbed my arm. The chant. "What time is it?" I checked the clock. My stomach turned. 4:44 a.m. We stumbled behind the counter, side by side. The floor felt unstable, like the tiles were trying to shift under our shoes. The lights dimmed again, this time to a deep red glow that washed everything in blood tones. I grabbed Jonah's hand. "Say it with me." We said it together, word for word, our voices shaking. "We close our eyes, but you stay sealed. We feed the hungry, but not the old." Something groaned in the freezer. A vent let out a sharp hiss. One of the ceiling tiles creaked like it was about to collapse. But then, stillness. The floor stopped moving. The red glow faded. The whispering died like a wave pulling back from shore. And then, silence. A real one. The kind you forget you've been missing. Jonah didn't let go of my hand right away. I think we were both too scared that letting go would start everything back up. Outside, the faintest edge of morning had begun to push against the dark. A soft gray line stretched across the treetops like a promise. We'd made it. Almost. By 5 a.m., the lights snapped back to normal. No more red, no more flickers. Just the usual sickly white glow of a fast food kitchen, buzzing faintly above our heads like it hadn't been fighting for its life all night. The fryer was back to its usual hum. The register beeped once like it was waking up. Even the air smelled normal again. Hot grease and too much salt. It was the kind of smell that clung to your hair and followed you home. Jonah sat down on the floor behind the counter, leaning against the back wall like his legs had finally given up. "I'm not coming back here," he said. His voice was flat. No anger, no panic. Just a tired kind of certainty. Me neither. We didn't need to talk about what we saw. We didn't need to argue about whether any of it had really happened. It had. Every second of it. The man in the raincoat, the whispering vents, the frost on the freezer handle. None of it felt like a dream, and none of it faded when the sun started rising. We waited until 6 a.m., not moving much. I sat cross-legged near the supply shelves, still holding the crumpled sticky note in my apron. The edges were stained with sweat and sauce, the ink even more smeared now. But the rules were still there. Still real. The back door finally creaked open, and Marty walked in like it was any other morning. He looked just as tired as when he left. Maybe more, but he didn't ask us anything. Didn't say a word. Jonah pushed himself up and walked out first. I followed, clocked out, grabbed my hoodie off the hook, and didn't even look back. We didn't tell Marty we were quitting. We didn't need to. By the time I got back to my car, the fog was lifting. The sky was a dull blue, the kind that makes your skin itch after a long night inside. I started the engine and sat there for a minute, watching the light push across the parking lot like it was scrubbing something clean. I could still see where the barefoot man had stood, right by the broken yellow parking line. I drove home with the windows down, trying to breathe, trying to believe that it was over. I thought maybe it was, until I got home and reached into my apron to toss the sticky note into the trash. That's when I felt it. Something small. Smooth. I pulled it out and stared at it in my palm. A single corn kernel. Yellow, glossy, perfectly shaped. But it was warm. Too warm. And wet. Before I could react, it pulsed, just once. Then it split open. Not like something soft, like a seed. A tiny seam cracking down the center with a wet pop. Something black and wriggling twitched inside. I dropped it into the kitchen sink and turned on the burner behind me. Pulled the lighter from the junk drawer. Watched the flame catch on a paper towel. Tossed it in and held my breath. The corn sizzled and popped once more before curling into ash. The smell was awful, sickly sweet and rotted all at once. I scrubbed the sink 3 times. That was 3 nights ago. I haven't slept since. Every time I close my eyes, I hear it. That whisper. Crawling in through vents and under doors. We are hungry, and we are still here.